for WRG 2030 from the World Bank. Our global director, he's held up in a meeting right now, so I'm opening on his behalf, and when he comes, he can give his remarks as well. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to this room. I think this is a very, very important session. We always talk about millions and billions that are needed for the water sector, but how do we do it is the question. And this session has been kind of structured in a way so that first we hear from the public sector, because public-private partnerships are very important to make this happen, to fill the gaps. But we'll also hear from the private sector to see what they're doing in terms of scaling up, in terms of meeting these SDGs, meeting the global aspirations that we have. Without much delay, let me just introduce the panel. Mr. Manoj Kumar Singh. He's the Agricultural Production Commissioner coming from India. Big welcome to you, Mr. Singh.
Thank you.
And we also have Dr. Baruddin, who's come from the Cape Town Mayoral Committee. And thank you for coming all the way. Big hand to you also. So the way we have structured the session is in the opening part, we'll have this public-private discussion. And then in the second half, we have 4 other distinguished speakers that are going to talk about scaling up on what they have done. We also have the moderator of the session, Mr. Kim Hue Neo. I think a lot of people know her from the WEF, and she'll moderate the session. But I think first, the speakers to come, and then you'll do the moderation, and we get a chance of Q&A to ask questions to our distinguished panel. So over to you, Mr. Singh.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Manoj Kumar Singh, and I am Agriculture Production Commissioner in state of Uttar Pradesh. I will take you through this brief presentation in which first I will show you the centrality of India in agriculture and food security, and within India, the centrality of state of Uttar Pradesh. And then I will be passing on to the work we are doing with 2030 WRG, and then the innovations which we are trying in irrigation sector and water sector. And finally, what we expect from this agreement which we are going to have with WRG. So this is the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is in the northernmost part of the country. Here are some of the basic data. Like if you see the total arable land in the world, it is around 1,500 million hectares, and almost 11% of that is in India. And of that, 12% is in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Similarly, when we look at the irrigated land, we see that almost 22% of agricultural land in world is under irrigation, whereas in India, this figure is around 60%, and in the state of Uttar Pradesh, this is about 77%. The next important indicator is about population. India is having around 17% of the global population, and of that, around 17% is in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Fresh water availability is around 4% for the country. But groundwater, when we talk about almost 27% of what we have as a reserve in India, is in the state of Uttar Pradesh. When we look at the food grain production, we can see that the global food grain production is around 3,000 million tons. And of that, 11% comes from India. And of that, 17% comes from the state of Uttar Pradesh. If we go to wheat, you can see that 764 million ton is the wheat production in the world. Of that, around 13% comes from India. And 35% of that is from the state of Uttar Pradesh. Similarly, for rice, for the total of 749, 23% is produced in India, and 10% is in state of Uttar Pradesh. Similarly, for other important food grain crops like pulses, almost 25% of world production is in India, and of that 11.5% is in state of Uttar Pradesh. Here I would like to tell you that the productivity, still the national average productivity of country and the state is almost 50% of what we have achieved in the world. So this gives a big potential for making improvement. Wheat productivity, almost 80% of world average productivity, and sugarcane country and the state of Uttar Pradesh, they are at par with what we are having in world. Now I will take you through the journey of 75 years, which is the independence, number of years of independence of India. What state of Uttar Pradesh has achieved in these 75 years in the sector of agriculture and food security. You can see that net sown area is almost same, it doesn't increase. That is around 16 million hectare. But area under irrigation from 4 million hectare, it has been almost 14 million hectare. So 3 times increase. Similarly, the production of wheat has gone up from 2 million tons to 37 million tons, a very substantial increase. And rice from 1.99 to 17 million tons. This is also a very significant increase. Fruit, we can see that it is from 4.5 million tons to 11 million tons. Similarly, vegetable production has gone up from 12 to 29 million tons. Milk production has increased almost 16, 17 times from 2 million tons to 32 million tons. Egg production has also increased substantially. The other products which we see in agriculture like honey, sugarcane production from 29 to 178 million tons. Oilseed from 0.18 to 1.27 million tons. Pulses from 3 to 2.53. There is a reduction because with the increase in area under irrigation, the production of pulses and coverage goes down. The agriculture contribution in gross value addition of the state was around 2.25 billion. And last year it was 50 billion US dollars. Life expectancy of the state, it has gone up from 36 to 66 years. So the state of Uttar Pradesh is number 1 in so many products in the country, like milk, wheat, mango, sugarcane. State of Uttar Pradesh is the largest producer of the food grain in the country and number 1 in fruit and vegetable production. And it has given food security to almost 240 million people. This surplus, which was because of what I showed you, the increase in production and productivity, during the period of COVID, for last 2 years, free food grain is being distributed to almost 150 million people, that is around 30 million households. Now we are coming to the 2030 agreement, which we have entered into with state of Uttar Pradesh. And here the targets are to increase the water use efficiency in rice and sugarcane and bringing innovative financing for doing that. Then arresting the decline in groundwater table, rejuvenation of the soil, and developing carbon market, and digitization of agriculture. With the help of scientists, agricultural scientists, recently a roadmap has been prepared for the agricultural sector in the state, and that envisages setting up of 4 special economic zones in 4 different regions of the state, and incentivizing farmers for going for regenerative agriculture and mechanization of small farms, sport-oriented production, and value addition at different stages. We are expecting that with this understanding or MOU with WRG, we will be able to make some good transfer of technology, which can enable us to go from 2.3 tons per hectare to 5.5 ton, which is the world average for rice. And similarly, we are looking for increasing the private financing of micro irrigation to increase the water use efficiency in different crops. We have taken up a project in which we are constructing water bodies for rainwater harvesting in each of the villages. There are around 1 lakh villages in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and there are schemes to finance drip and sprinkler irrigation to the farmers. We are also creating some models where we are bringing around 2,000 acres of land in same where government is setting up the system of sprinkler and drip through this water conservation and water harvesting structures. The state of Uttar Pradesh has also entered into an agreement with Israel government in which we are like developing some standard operating procedures, like what is the suitable month for using groundwater and what is the suitable month for using surface water or the water harvested in ponds. Then there is a big project of linking of rivers that is in the name of Ken and Betwa, which is under implementation. We are also focusing on distributing soil health card to all the farmers and to increase the organic farming and natural farming, thereby increasing the organic carbon in the soil. In this meeting, what we expect that we are requesting or we are looking for private investment in sector of mechanization, technology transfer, financing, and digital services. That's all from my side. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Thank you.
We will get a chance to ask you some questions later on this lovely presentation you made. So now, Mr. Bauruddin, your turn. Maybe you can tell us what you're doing in Cape Town about, like, you know, the water security story.
I thought you were going to ask about day zero. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Typical to someone who's making his presentation for the first time at this forum, I've arrived in Stockholm, but my presentation hasn't. So that's stuck somewhere in many inboxes, but if you will allow me, and I'll try and go through a very interesting subject matter. So what you would have seen today was a slideshow about the City of Cape Town's approach to addressing invasive alien species as a tool to promote water security. And so also to touch on in that space, the idea of looking at the financing models around this, the role of public-private partnerships, the role of private industry, but also the role of government itself. And so I make the joke about day zero, but we know very well that the city came too close to a day zero situation. Many cities in my country at this moment are very close to that situation as well. And this was during the periods 2016, 2019, when the city of Cape Town went through its worst drought in its history. And so we also know, on top of the challenge that day zero had presented to us, that the Western Cape water supply system, which supplies the needs, the water needs within the city of Cape Town, is also under constraint. And this is for many reasons. Climate change must be mentioned, increasing population in our city and neighboring cities as well, but also encroaching alien vegetation. And also, in addition to that, the limited additional surface water sources that we have in our city. And so we look at this through the lens of social and environmental and economic benefit, where we realize that to allow the spread of invasive alien plants and trees and so on without being managed reduces groundwater replenishment. It also reduces the stream flow into the Western Cape water supply system. And so following a 2030 Water Resources Group and World Bank supported hydroeconomic analysis of the Western Cape water system, we realized then that we've got to reach out to partners in order to support our efforts to move towards water security. And so, because I have the only presentation here, I'm going to show you how full our dams are at the moment. For those of you in the front who can see. And so we're very blessed. We've been receiving significant amount of rains at the moment. And the presentation would have showed you that the city of Cape Town has 6 major dam sources, water sources that feed our city. And so in July 2021, the City of Cape Town and the Nature Conservancy signed a 2-year memorandum of understanding. And this MOU involves a 50 million rand commitment, which in euros is about 2.9 million euros, to clear invasive alien trees in remote mountainous areas, to reclaim the water losses which are caused by these trees, which are invading our catchments. And so these efforts then would realize a saving of water to the value of 55 billion liters of water each year. That's quite significant. In other words, it's to say that the water losses would be reduced by 55 billion liters of water each year. And just to put that into context, that's 1/6 of our city's current supply needs. And then further to that, within 30 years, these yearly gains would be projected to treble to 100 billion liters of water saved as a result of the removal of alien invasive plants. And so again, because there's a graph here, I'll just speak to it quickly. The graph, which you would have seen, shows that the catchment restoration increases the water supply at the lowest unit cost. It says it's the most effective thing to do in order to save our water. And so this catchment restoration, we know, provides water at 1/10 of the unit cost of various alternative options. And it makes much more cost-effective solution than any of the other water augmentation solutions. And the graph then would have compared it to desalination. It would have compared it to groundwater exploration and water reuse, and a number of other solutions that we've proposed. At the same time, whilst removing these invasive alien plants, there are other advantages. We've employed thousands of Cape Townians to be a part of this program. And so they then receive employment, which is so important in my city and my country. And on top of that, necessary skills for them to then engage in the economy, the green economy. And without it needing to be said, the prime advantage of this program is the clearing of, at this stage, 4,600 roughly hectares of land. And in the coming financial year, we plan to clear 7,000 hectares of land where invasive alien plants find themselves. There's another graph, obviously, for those who can see. The graph simply shows that over time, as we remove the invasive alien species, and as we reduce their density, as we reduce their size, the cost of needing to attend to this decreases dramatically. So in this early stages, you've heard the numbers that I've shared, and I'll share it again in a moment. But we've seen that it's necessary to make this investment now in order to reap the benefits later on in terms of water security. And so of the total funding that is needed for this project, 372 million rand, which is about $22.5 million, roughly 49% of these total costs have been sourced through WWF, private sector funding, the Nature Conservancy, private sector funding, and also government funding. So where to from here, ladies and gentlemen? I think it goes without saying that the benefit of supporting and expanding this program would have been well represented in my presentation, but hopefully I've done it justice through this and my graphs. So to expand our relationship with all of our stakeholders, to look at how we close this particular funding gap, which is still quite large, 49% at the moment funded with 51% still to go. And so looking at alternative funding sources and then working towards water security in my city, the city of Cape Town. Thank you very much.
Maybe we can bring two chairs up so that we can question the two gentlemen. Perhaps before I start, this room is very full, which is great. Can I have a show of hands? Who's from the public sector? Right, so we can have a sense, public sector, private sector, overwhelming majority, NGO sector. This is great. So it's wonderful because really this panel is all about public-private collaboration. The Water Resources Group has been set up, I think 14 years, 2008, and is actually one of the largest public-private programs that is in place today with a very successful track record of successes. But the point that we want to put across today is how do we get speed and scale, right? Good work, but maybe we need to move faster because I think all of us in this room know that the climate crisis is upon us. This year, it's very clear evidence. We're seeing droughts in almost all parts of the world, right? And I'm very delighted that we have Manoj from India and Dr. Zahid from South Africa join us to share the government perspective. And then after this, we'll have 5 representatives from the private sector also to provide their inputs. And hopefully we can all walk away with some good ideas of how we can work more closely together for systems change. Speed and scale, that's the 2 words I want to leave with you. So maybe I start with Manoj, if I may. You spoke a lot about the progress that Andhra Pradesh has made, the significant role it plays in India and also in the rest of the world. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the key enablers of success from the government's perspective? What are the policy mechanisms you had to put in place to help support and scale the efforts going on?
As I showed you in my presentation, like there has been substantial increase in production and productivity. I have got a mic.
Oh, you have a mic? Okay.
There has been a substantial increase in production and productivity of most of the products, agricultural products, and especially the state of UP has population of 240 million. And we have not only provided food security, but also been able to export to other states and some of the food grains to other countries also. So the main focus of government has been to expand the area under irrigation. The moment you increase the area under irrigation, 1 acre of land, which won't have been sufficient to sustain one family, if it is brought under irrigation, you can go for multiple cropping, or at least crop intensity increases by 200%, and it is good enough to bring one family out of poverty if it is properly irrigated. So the main focus was on irrigation. But irrigation alone can't do wonders. You have to have good high-yielding varieties, which also calls for good investment in fertilizers. So this combined investment or integrated approach for expanding the area under irrigation, bringing fertilizer by domestic production also, and if required through imports also, and all the integrated plant protection measures which are required with this high-yielding varieties. So this is my response, that an integrated approach on behalf of government, and at this scale, I think only government can do it. Thank you.
Very good. And we have many private sector representatives in this room, and you spoke about drawing more financing into the space and the huge potential there is. How would you, in your government capacity, support more private sector financing?
Yeah, there are certain things which calls for more of innovation and more of new things rather than only finance. Like through different schemes in the government from different ministries, we can muster or organize the funds required. But some new ideas, as I was discussing with Sharoj in the morning, like we have a project which gives around 100 crores of Indian rupees for mechanization. So when these equipments are handed over to the farmers producers organization, it becomes difficult to make optimal use of that. So we were discussing that, can we develop systems of like hiring, which is being done for cabs by Uber and all, so that if farmers in a region, say 10 square kilometer, they require some machine, they can give a call and they can hire those things and they can pay rental for that. So these kind of innovative steps, which calls for more of technology and less of financial investment, we are looking for that kind of support. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could turn to Dr. Zahid, thank you for your presentation around removal of invasive alien species and how that could actually enable more freshwater supply. Right now it's based off grants, right? And what are your ideas around mobilizing more private capital to support and scale what you're doing?
So to answer that, I believe it's important to look at the space, the governance space, and to tie to the previous question around what can governments do to make it easier for the private industry to want to be able to invest. And so the question around government making decisions, as we know, often is a very lethargic process, and being able to reduce that lead time, being able to reduce the period between a proposal and a decision being made is very important, because businesses and industries don't want to sit with their money where they want to invest it in social good. So I believe that that's important. How do we look at the red tape? How do we look at the bureaucracy, and how do we support businesses to achieve that? Also looking at how we can promote trust and organizational strengthening, institutional strengthening between government itself and also between industries, so that what can be, at least for me in my regional and local context, a barrier to investment is then addressed from the front to encourage this kind of support for government processes. So what can be done to encourage? I think environmental reform is critical, environment in the sense of government processes, but also to look at alternatives. We know that it's not sustainable to rely only on public money. If it is the case, then that would have an immediate impact on rates and so on from residents. And again, from a very local perspective, any increase in any rate would have very difficult impacts on already poor families in our city. And so looking at how we can reach out to organizations through that environmental reform, I think is critical to support that process.
Right. Before I open the floor for questions, I was actually in Cape Town during day 0. Right. And I was in a hotel and there was water rationing. It was quite a sobering thought and experience. Can you share with us a little bit more about the types of reforms that the government is looking at or going through to strengthening urban resilience?
Yeah. A very difficult answer. Before there was big support towards subsidizing water for our poorest communities. With day 0 and with necessary tariff changes, a fixed tariff was introduced, which still to this day is referred to as the drought tax in our city, a very critical challenge that funds our new water program. So this is about 300 million liters of new water that we are wanting to produce from new water sources by 2030. That kind of funding needed for those kinds of projects outside of national government grants, outside of grants from other organizations is in one way only possible through us transforming the way we charge our residents to make it sustainable from an income perspective, which the tariff, as one example, was critical towards achieving.
Right. Can I open the floor for questions? Yes. Perhaps, yeah, we'll unfortunately have to share the mic. Yeah. Maybe if you could just introduce yourself and then before you ask.
Hello, my name is Juan Pablo Romero. I'm an independent consultant and I'm from Colombia. I consult on collective action platforms and that entails innovative finance. So I was wondering if in the case of India, what you were referring, if you have identified possibilities of innovative financing within the public sector. Meaning, because my experience is that you are always trying to reach money from the private sector, but that one is not always enough, but there are possibilities of improving efficiency in expenditure, for example, within the public sector. So have you analyzed any possibilities of public financing innovations? Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe he can, Manoj, you can
Should I wait
respond
for the
first.
question?
Oh, no, please go ahead.
In government also, we are identifying the different ways and means of improving the efficiency of the funding. And recently, like state of Uttar Pradesh, they have decided a target to reach $1 trillion of GDP, state GDP. And in that, as a precursor, we are setting up a startup fund, and with public contribution of around 400 crores and 3,600 crores coming from private sector. So this is a new kind of thing which is being done or tried by the state government, where we are creating a fund for startups, where people can come and pitch up their ideas, especially focusing the agriculture and agro processing, and then it will be funded by this fund.
So the government is providing blended finance.
Yeah, nucleus
to-
of around 400 crores and 3,600 crore of private money will be mobilized. Yeah, sorry.
Is it on already?
It's on. It's for the people online.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for these wonderful presentations. My name is Lars Heijn from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And I was really impressed by you managing to give the presentation without your sheets even. That's a great job, I must say.
Right.
So my question is this, you mentioned we need to move at speed, right, to address the global climate and water crisis. And at the same time, of course, we need to make sure that the quality of what we're doing is good, right, that it's ecologically sound. And in this case, I was wondering which quality assurance process you have. For example, if you remove trees, it will increase your erosion rates, which is not good for catchment management. Or another thing is that if you remove your trees, your trees cause water losses because the evapotranspirate, right? So basically they recycle water back to the atmosphere. But that water, again, falls as rain. So there is, of course, a risk that if you remove your trees, that actually you kind of solve a problem here, but you create a problem in another area because you reduce the rainfall in other parts of your catchment. And that is a big risk with this kind of projects, I would say. So I was wondering if you consider that, and if so, how you deal with such risks. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. To add to that, often these sources of the water that make its way to our dams run outside of our municipality. And so linking what you've said to intergovernmental processes is so important, because what's the point of us doing anything in the city if our towns next door to us in other municipalities don't put as much emphasis in trying to conserve the water as what we have. So it's not a matter of simply identifying alien invasive plants in catchment areas. What I didn't share, which was also in the presentation, was the entire process that is undertaken in order to identify where, from an ecological perspective, is the best place in terms of tree density and proximity to water spaces that would allow for safe removal of these kinds of trees over a period of time. And so there's an intense identification process with all the experts, hydrological experts, the environmental experts within the Water and Sanitation Directorate, but also with our partners in the space where expertise does reside, often when local government doesn't have those expertise. And so that assessment is undertaken, the environmental impact assessment, the cost benefit assessment is done as well, because it's not a matter of simply going in, pulling trees out. It's a matter of identifying the right and best location to do that before anything else is done.
Thank you. Yes, to this gentleman.
Thank you very much. I'm Pera Ramwedi from Southern Africa, head of a commission called OCACOM. I was very interested in your presentation, Mr. Sin, about increased land under irrigation, which for me assumes that you are having adequate water to supply for that irrigation. Is there any limiting factor whatsoever that you could give us insight in? Because the way it sounds is as though I can increase land under irrigation And because I come in from a transboundary water course, I would be concerned what the other states would be saying about my abstraction and subsequent use of the water in that particular instance. Whilst of course the production is high, and issues around water efficiencies. I think you mentioned part of that, but one would be interested to hear how you are carrying out that process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good point. You see, the state of Uttar Pradesh is situated in Indo-Gangetic plain, and there are many perennial rivers like Ganga, Yamuna and all. So 24% of groundwater reserve of the country is in this state. And in 1950, the area under irrigation through surface source, that is canal, was predominant, more than 50%. But currently the area being irrigated by using groundwater is almost 60%. So this groundwater replenishment is also good, but I can't deny that in some pockets, groundwater table is going down. But that way that this state has abundant rainfall around 1000 millimeter and huge storage dams. But still, availability of abundant water is one thing, and focusing on making good use of it or very efficient use of it is what is our current focus. Like we have undertaken big projects of lining of canals to reduce the seepage losses and all. But now our focus is mainly on going for methods like which are more efficient, drip, sprinkler, and also changing the cropping pattern. Like 1 kg of rice, not many people know that it requires around 3000 liters of water. So we are trying to diversify to vegetable cultivation and other crops. Like next year is going to be the year of millets declared by UN. So we are trying to diversify from water intensive to non-water intensive crops also, and also going for technologies which can save water or enable us to make more efficient use of water. I hope I have answered your question. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question because you're both coming from areas where there are very many smallholder farmers, right? And one of the points, Manoj, you mentioned was that cost, effort, and also the value of this effort was what was hindering obstacles. How can we help so that we can move a lot faster and address some of these barriers?
You see, the average size of holding is around 1 acre or 1.2 acres in this state of Uttar Pradesh. And national average is also around 1.3, 1.4 acres of land. So 70–80% are small and marginal farmer. So that's why when I mentioned about mechanization, we can't expect that all these small farmers, they will mechanize on their own. So that's why we were talking about creating farm equipment banks, which can be given with the farmers producers organization, and then it can be equitably used as per the need by this different smallholder. And to tell you, like, there are positive affirmative actions from government side also about taking up projects which can benefit these small and medium farmers more than large farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to add?
Yeah, I think if I apply the question again to a local context, there's a variety of farming types. In the north of the city, there's the more established farming area. But across our city, we have a number of small scale informal farming. And so looking at how we're able to bring these individuals, entities together in order to best utilize the land in the most sustainable way possible by applying agricultural principles that doesn't deplete the land of its natural resources, but also at the same time to support through an education process the importance and value of using water, especially groundwater in this instance, responsibly. Because often what is is unseen or what is not seen is not appreciated, as is the theme of this week. And I find from my engagements with residents within the city and colleagues around the country that that's a key point that we need to zoom into, because after all, it's a shared resource and shared space when we consider these entities.
Thank you. We're almost out of time because we're going to move on to the private sector panel. But before I let you go, quick words from you. What keeps you up awake right now? And two, what makes you hopeful? What either of you can start.
So I'm very new to the water space. Medicine is my background, but having moved to water and sanitation after our last local election, but importantly to acknowledge the important link between water and sanitation and public health as principles. And so what keeps me awake is two things: the access to basic services within our informal settlements in my city, and then also my mayor's voice at the back of my mind telling me, Zaid, you can't screw up the new water program. You've got to produce the 300 million liters by 2030, if not sooner. So that's what keeps me up, but loving every moment.
Thank you. And Manoj?
The country has a GDP of around 3 trillion, and it is aiming for 5 trillion in next 5 to 7 years. And in that, 1 trillion is the target fixed as a GDP for the state of Uttar Pradesh. And it can never come if we don't focus on agriculture and agriculture processing and diversification to the crops which can yield more and which can fetch more for the farmers. So that is one thing. Like, we are around 17% of the population of the country, but we want to take our GDP to at least 20% to match that. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And let's thank the two gentlemen. Do you want to invite them further?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Singh, and thank you, Dr. Zahid. So now we move on to the private sector part of the discussion. We have 5 speakers for this, mainly from the private sector, but we also have one person from Hungary who's going to bring the public sector perspective as well. So can I invite the next set of presenters up on stage here, please?
We'll need more chairs. 2 more. I can also stand, so.
So first, let me just introduce you. Mr. Ramzi Issa, he's the Managing Director and Head of Credit Suisse Restructuring. Then we have David Grant, Global Sustainability Director from PepsiCo. We have Ms. Madhu Rajesh, who is Senior Director, Water and Agriculture, Coca-Cola. And Mr. Gabor Namet from Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade from Hungary. And we have one other person, I don't know if he has connected yet. Okay.
I'm here.
Andre. Oh, you're here?
Yes, Andre, you're online. We can't see you yet, but we can hear you.
We can hear you, Andre. So welcome, Andre. And Andre is the Global Vice President of Sustainability, AB InBev. So thank you, everybody, for making time for the session. And over to the first presenter. Andre, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to go. I thought I would comment on what can the
Andre,
private
just
sector
hang on
bring.
a second. Let's just try to make sure that
Okay.
everyone can see you before you start.
Okay, I can see you clearly.
You can see us? Okay. That's powerful.
Shall I go or shall I wait?
I think, okay, why don't you start? Because it's a
Okay.
panel discussion, right?
So
we can get
maybe Andre will start with the other panelists, and then once you appear on screen, I will give the floor back to you. Is that all right?
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay, I will not go into a long introduction as to why business can be a force for good and how there are many, many opportunities for business to work closely with the government to actually scale, whether it's innovations in finance, technology, or solutions for the water challenge. But I would love to start with Credit Suisse because finance has been spoken a lot today, right? And I know Credit Suisse has been a leader in the space looking at new financing instruments. So if I could turn to you, Ramzi, how do you think we can close this financing gap in the water sectors? And can you tell us about what are some of the ideas and initiatives that Credit Suisse has put forward to help address the challenge?
Thank you for that question, and thanks for the invitation as well. You may need to cut me off because I can speak for a very long time, so feel free to proceed. So first, maybe on the first part of the question in terms of how to close the financing gap. So I'm obviously coming from a finance practitioner's point of view. I'm not in the details in terms of like the actual projects that are being done on the ground. And my role is more from a capital markets kind of perspective, which is how can we crowd in, institutional investors, which pension funds, insurance companies, basically long-term investors into the space, which is something at Credit Suisse we've been also working on for a number of years, which is, yeah, sure. Is that better? Which is obviously beneficial for a lot of developing economies, because in terms of the transactions that we're working on, the source of capital for these developing economies are actually from a different source of funding that the countries typically issue, because they have some form of credit enhancement, and therefore the types of investors and the supply of capital that is available is coming from a different pocket. And so that's just for context. But in terms of how to close the financing gap, so I think there's kind of three parts. The first is, which is more from the technical expertise point of view, which is advocating for a transaction or for projects or financing where water may not necessarily be the primary focus. It's more like to piggyback on an existing transaction where the argument is that water plays a very crucial role in basically everything that we do, and therefore it's an indirect way of bringing capital from transactions that are going to happen regardless because they need to happen. Let's say allocating a budget or revenue or some of the funding into water infrastructure projects. I think the second thing is more from the financial institutions' point of view for banks, for instance, and this is something that CS has done now for a while, in fact, but it's more about analyzing transactions along the metrics of the SDGs, right? To say, well, what is the consequence of doing this project from all these different types of considerations, and it should help to inform, whether a transaction kind of goes ahead or whether, an offset needs to be done somehow, right? So I think from a bank's point of view, when you're allocating financial resources, and institutional investors also think like this as well now, and they're becoming more sophisticated in the space. It is to be kind of very diligent in terms of thinking more critically outside of just the pure finance point of view. And then I think the last thing, which is what we've done recently, and I don't know if we'll have time to talk about it, but which is kind of a public-private partnership that we've done recently with the Nature Conservancy. It was a phenomenal NGO, by the way. We've been working with them for a very long time now, which we did a transaction in Belize towards the end of last year, which was a Belize blue bond, where we helped Belize refinance their external debt, so their commercial held debt, with fairly significant fiscal benefits for the country. So the Belize actually got upgraded after the transaction, but it also was at a much cheaper terms than they could originate based on their own credit strength because we had a credit enhancement from the US government through their development bank. So in that transaction, for instance, so the bank, us, we try to help arrange the financing structure in a way that can attract third-party capital, so the long-term investors that I was saying at the very outset of the speech. Whereas, the Nature Conservancy has a technical expertise in terms of giving substance to the, in this case, the marine protection, the sustainability goals that are critical in the case of Belize, specifically is where, 40%, for example, of their GDP comes from tourism, right? So I think that kind of public-private partnership helps because the financial institution have maybe the finance expertise, and on the other side, it's they help define what the projects are, and also to kind of think of it in a way that helps attract kind of outside of investors.
Thank you, Ramzi. Andre, you're now on screen. We'll give the floor to you. What do you see as the role of corporates in contributing to urban water resilience? I mean, you've heard us speak about Cape Town and then agricultural sector earlier. And how can corporates be encouraged to do more? You yourself are from South Africa, so we're all very keen to hear your inputs and perspectives.
Sure, it's a pleasure joining you, and I'm really sorry I'm not with you today. So I think just to start with, we must recognize the key role of government in water. So by making the case for private sector participation, this is not to replace public policy, but really to make the case for what the private sector can bring that is quite unique to this growing water crisis that we're facing around the world. I think Cape Town is a really good example, but we know the combination of climate change, economic and demographic growth, infrastructure challenges, etc., makes this a common challenge and a common risk for all of us. So I think the unique things that the private sector can bring is a form of convening and focus on water by bringing leadership and motivation. Of course, none of those are uniquely private sector skills, but we know, particularly in a local authority case, there's so many competing priorities. And that's the nature of democracy, so that's not unusual. But where water rises on the agenda, the private sector can make a really strong case to the local authorities and other local players in terms of the focus on water. So I think that focus is the first one that I'll highlight. The second one is to recognize the importance of discretionary resources. Private sector funding on water is minuscule compared to public sector investment. But because we have discretionary resources of $100,000 a year or $1 million there, which the government often doesn't have because the money is part of a long-term budget and is tied to very particular programs. So by working with local authorities with that discretionary resource, we can often bring a lot of new progress and initiatives that's not possible for the public sector on its own. Thirdly, I would say innovation and global insights. I think we all have huge experiences around the world that we can share. A lot of technology is growing in the water sector with enormous application, both for water efficiency, but also for investment in watersheds that we think is important. And then finally, finding new ways to scale. I'll use an example where we're working with a number of partners in Mexico by investing in high-risk locations for ourselves, but together with local authorities and also with funding from GIZ, they match our funding on a euro for euro basis, so we can start scaling and then working with local authorities by investing in a combination of watershed solutions, by investing in recharging of the aquifer, nature-based solutions, and then also conservation agriculture. More and more we see the importance of agriculture in terms of helping locations get better with water use. So I would say as the AB InBev as the world's local brewer, in the sense that we always end up, although we're a global company, brewing beer locally. No water, no beer, no barley, no beer. In both cases, we really need the good quality local water to brew our beers and to have our supply chain to be resilient. So for us, we share the risk and the concern with the public sector and with the NGOs and communities, and therefore we also have to invest in the shared opportunity of a better and more resilient water future for us all. Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. And maybe I'll quickly move on to David, who is the Global Sustainability Director for PepsiCo. You've experimented or implemented models for public-private collaboration. And could you tell us or share with us some of the lessons from these collaboration models?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. And unfortunately, you get another South African, but hopefully I can keep pace with Andre and everyone else. So I guess there's 4 points I'd make here, and I'm not suggesting that agriculture is unique. That agriculture alone has these lessons coming out of it. We do a lot of good stuff in water, but I think agriculture has managed to scale projects at a scale a lot larger and a lot quicker than the water, what we're trying to do in water, at least. So I think the first thing I'd say is that the agricultural partnerships per se have been able to attract players throughout the value chain. So if you look at a typical water partnership, there may be one or two corporates with the NGO. If you look at an agricultural partnership, typically looks like they'll have a grower, they'll have the seed producer, they'll have the trader, the supplier, the consumer goods company, and the retailer all collaborating together in one area. And, you know, being able to get all these actors together, you automatically scale the ability to get these programs at a lot larger geographic footprint than just one actor alone with an NGO. I think the second thing is that they've been really good at diversifying funding, and they've got some really interesting financial models. So, for example, everything starting with catalytic funding, so getting startups off the ground with funders that are able to take a bit more risk with debt or equity or guarantees, then through to moving to more formalized financing like subsidies or grants as these programs get a bit more mature. And I think the other key thing as well is the longevity of the funding. So, you know, typically with these water programs, you know, the corporates will invest over 1, 2, 3 year time scales, then potentially renew after that. Some of these agriculture partnerships, like the Rimba Collective, for example, around palm oil, that's a 25-year commitment. And, you know, having longevity gives the implementers on the ground that surety that they can implement these programs, which take a lot of time. And we know for water, for example, takes multiple years to get that right. So we need to move from 1 or 2 year commitments to these much longer commitments. Yes, they review it every 5 years, but there's that certainty of a very long-term commitment by all the partners. I think the third one, which is really interesting, is that they target multiple benefits. So instead of just focusing on water like we do within our water programs, they'll look at biodiversity, they look at soil health, they look at carbon, they look at local community wash access, they look at farmer resilience. And by having this portfolio of options, they then can entice other players who would not normally be normal partners in these partnerships to participate. And you automatically then start scaling that funding available to implement the programs. And then the last one is the agriculture partners have been really good at their capability and capacity building. So it's one thing providing finance, it's one thing providing new technology, but unless the guys on the ground know how to use it, it doesn't help at all. And what's really good is their ability to get farmer to farmer networks going, so that they build a local trust on the ground, which goes a really far way in terms of getting these projects going.
Thank you. It's very helpful. I'll pass on to Madhu Rajesh from Coca-Cola. If you could give us some examples of operationalizing water security in the supply chain and how you think we could scale such solutions around the world.
Of course. Thank you. For us at Coca-Cola, water security is a key component of our ESG agenda. And when it comes to water security, we have a long history of replenishment work going back almost 2 decades. When we were developing our 2030 water security strategy, we started looking at other components of water security, and in that, communities and watersheds are critical elements. But most importantly, we conducted an enterprise water footprint risk assessment, which found that about 92% of our total blue water footprint comes in our agricultural and ingredient supply chain. And so bringing in our supply chain was a critical component of our water strategy. We have 2 commitments. One is to look at promoting advanced water management practices for our global priority ingredients that are grown in water-stressed regions. And the second is to implement watershed stewardship plans in all our priority watersheds, including sourcing watersheds. So at a strategic level, that's how we are considering water security. But to give you some practical examples of the kind of projects that we are doing, I'd like to talk to you about an example first from India, because that's where I come from, and actually from my home state of Uttar Pradesh, where we worked with sugarcane farmers since 2016. Uttar Pradesh is a sugarcane growing belt in India. And this particular project called Meetha Sona Unnati, and I'll translate that for you. Meetha Sona means sweet gold, and Unnati means progress. So the project started in 2016, working with sugarcane farmers and really looking at promoting more efficient water use in agriculture, techniques such as drip irrigation, looking at high density yield in farming that really helped capacity build farmers and increase their income. And the project was so successful that we've now replicated it in the state of Karnataka and across multiple fruits like mangoes, apples, oranges, lychees, which are all critical for our beverages. And to date worked with about 150,000 farmers. And the project was a collaboration between our company, our bottling system, our suppliers, the Coca-Cola Foundation, and implementing partners. And that's a model of how we worked collaboratively to scale. I'll also share another example from China, also for sugarcane. We have a project there which we started in collaboration with the Coca-Cola Foundation, the United Nations Development Program, and some other partners like the China CIETE, China International, I'll always get it wrong, Institute of it'll come back to me, sorry.
Environment and Economic Development.
No, actually I have it in my notes. I'm going to read that out. It's the China International Center for Economic and Technical Exchanges. Sorry about that. I should have remembered that. So this is a particular project in the Guangxi province of China, which produces about 60% of China's sugarcane, but is also an area which is prone to floods and droughts. And we again worked with farmers way back in 2011 over a 2-year period, covering an area of about 200 hectares, so a small area that we started working in. And we promoted drip irrigation, we promoted circular use of water, which was really coming from sugarcane mills, and it was treated wastewater. And the project was really successful and was replicated by the local government across the province of Guangxi and in other neighboring provinces as well. And by January 2021, had actually reached about 350,000 hectares of agricultural area for sugarcane production was covered. So some examples of how the private sector can come in, have a proof of pilot, and either scale that up through its own initiatives or working in collaboration with other partners.
Thank you. Thank you, Madhu. And last but not least, I would like to invite Gabor, who is head of Department for Water Diplomacy and Tied Aid Credits, and you're with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary. Hungary is one of the key partners of the WRG, and can you elaborate more on the role that you see governments playing in this water resources group in collaboration with the private sector?
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, for the possibility. Good afternoon for everyone. Yes, I'm the black sheep here in this panel, maybe. So I would like to highlight what public sector can do with private, because that's my job and that's what we do. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary, where I highlight trade because it's been 2014. Our leadership decided to mix the two, like policy making with the cooperation of the private sector and how to promote their external activities. And in that regard, also important to note how my department was created for water diplomacy, because there is no public engagement without private cooperation. Just simply tell you what our role in this chain. I would say we are the one who pushed the boat of Hungarian water corporate sector participants and help them to make the first steps to go abroad and realize investments abroad in a new field that is full of risk for investment. So we also provide them a kind of a package of financing, starting from feasibility studies to pilot project, and later on moving with concessional credits, tie dates. But the main aim is to that project to be independent from our ministry and find the corporate funding, find their own commercial banking financing. So we are the one who put them on the external market. And to come back to your question, we also see that there must be a change also how you can promote foreign investment in other countries, because thankfully we were quite lucky enough to provide these subsidies, but on a long term we know very well that Hungarian companies can spread their knowledge and special expertise in the field of water management, water treatment alone without our government's engagement. So briefly, that's where I see there is the link between private and public, and on the other side also our participation at the WRG's operation. Like we try to also know more participants, more actors, and to identify with whom, how we can work together. But we are still at the beginning of this procedure, but it's a really great platform to open our eyes and to widen our activities and to get more engaged, because in the end of the day, that's always one step closer to the realization of the 2030 agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have about 15 minutes and I would like to invite questions from the floor. Yes.
I can talk really loud about it. I actually have a question for David. David, PepsiCo has a goal, which is give water access to 100 million people. So we only need 10 PepsiCos to solve that sustainable development goal. And I was just wondering how you're going to do that. And if it's possible for your colleague on the left-hand side and the guy on the screen to copy the same goal. And then we're like a third way down the SDG.
Madhu or Andre, would you like to respond? Or David, would you like to say something? Yeah. Andre, you want to say something? You heard a question or comments?
I think David can speak on the 100 million. We believe that the private sector has an important role to play in water access. We do see that the state is a much more effective actor in terms of long-term sustainable water access for communities as part of public health and public safety. And we do not see the private sector as a major provider of water. But I do think we can all be a little bit more ambitious, and it'll be good to hear from David on those numbers.
Yes, we set a goal of key to this is we have a foundation that's got the finances, which is really important because this is not business as usual. Equally important is the massive amount of partnerships with both with the know being skilled water, etc. But it also importantly partnering
partnering with local municipalities to divert points on some parts of the goal provide water like that. You know, we want to try to support local municipalities reach.
Just keep on talking.
Okay.
You like this?
We need to help, work with municipalities to reach these underserviced areas, and with the mission to make sure these are long-term solutions, not just a quick we'll sink a well and all as well. Okay. Thank you.
Madhu, would you like to speak? It is unusual to have Coke and Pepsi sitting next to each other, but it speaks to the beauty of this group, right? Which is pre-competitive collective action, right?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that community water access has always been a key part of our agenda and is an integral part of our 2030 water security strategy. We have a clear goal of supporting access to wash or promoting access to wash in all our global priority communities. And by that, we've been priority communities when it comes to our operations, to our sourcing regions, as well as commercial growth regions. We also have a commitment of working with our bottling system and our suppliers to promote access to wash in that supply chain piece as well. And another goal of promoting community resilience to climate, so both adaptation and recovery. So we've, this is an area of focus for us going forward, but it is also an area of work that we've been investing quite significantly in. In fact, prior to my role at Coca-Cola, in one of my previous roles, I used to work for an implementing partner that implemented Coca-Cola's Replenish Africa initiative across multiple countries. Replenish Africa initiative was an initiative that the Coca-Cola Foundation launched. It was backed by a $65 million commitment, and is only one example of many similar initiatives that we have. And it reached across Africa. It worked with about 4,000 communities across 41 countries and reached about 6 million people till 2020. And it's an area of work that we continue to work on. So I think it's being good community citizens is a part of corporate stewardship strategies, and certainly ours.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, there's one right at the back. Here's Ramsey from Credit Suisse. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. My name is Abdi. I'm from Kenya. I work with Gatsby Africa. PPP has been pushed for a while as one of the options to fill in financing gap. But if you look at the transactions that have been successfully closed in the road sector and energy, they are quite more compared to water. Apart from the usual low return on investment from the private sector, what are some of the fears and challenges that have really slowed down uptake of PPP in the mainstream water sector?
So thanks for the question. I think I didn't catch the part of the question in terms of which size of the investment is smaller than I think it was energy you compared it to, or okay. So I think from several things actually. So the first is I think water is kind of a new topic that really hasn't been. So again, taking a step back from the capital markets point of view, there's been a lot of discussion about green. Okay, so blue is really hasn't been on the mind of institutional professional money managers. And so one is just the timing and so where we find ourselves. I think second is it's also a little bit more complex because oceans, for instance, there it involves you have the kind of the jurisdiction between the federal let's say, government versus like the local provinces or municipalities. So it's a complex kind of from a international kind of legal point of view, which, you know, requires some brain damage to kind of work through kind of the finer details, right? So that's kind of the second thing. And then I think that the third thing as well is that for water or blue, I think historically, not necessarily you think of it as an income producing asset, right? Which in some of the kind of the corporate sectors that you're mentioning, that, you know, that is part of it. But I think that's changing, because I think, you know, speaking with institutional investors, they, and it was mentioned actually in the first session about the droughts that we've seen across the globe this year. I think it's, you know, people acknowledge that it's a problem and it needs funding, and I think it's just trying to work through all those kind of three considerations to kind of package it together. But the good news is that, you know, the transaction that we did in Belize last year, end of last year, is the first one. It was a very large transaction from, it was a definition swap, but it's a very large transaction, largest ever done. We have another transaction that's going to be announced in a couple of weeks to kind of show that it's not a, you know, one-hit wonder. And we have potentially a third transaction, which is a very sizable transaction that will be announced in the coming months as well. So I think there is now momentum and people are focusing on that, and I think that'll help generate awareness and the investor base. Very good.
Unless there are burning questions, otherwise I'm going to do a split round and then hand it back to Suraj to give the closing remarks. If I could ask the panelists, any burning questions? No? Okay, so just a quick reaction from you. If there is one collective action that you would like to see happen over the next year or so, right? Next year is a big water year. What would you suggest? Who wants to go first? David, you want to go first? One collective action that you would like to see happen.
Oh, please, Andre.
Andre, you want to start first?
Yeah, well, during World Water Week, a number of discussions have happened, and some involved PepsiCo and ourselves. And we're starting to make a public commitment that we want to do something probably in Mexico together. So I think we should invite Coca-Cola and Credit Suisse to join us. So let's do something in Mexico. Water is an enormous challenge in Mexico. So we've got to start somewhere. So why not start there?
Yeah, I agree with Andre. We made a commitment in our last session, but I think what we need to do is also deconstruct the current partnership model. It's not working. We need to rethink about how we finance these partnerships. We need to think about how we get a lot more players involved with these water partnerships, because at the moment we're playing with pilots and we can't do that anymore.
Andrew, very happy to talk about Mexico. Let's pick that up offline. But other than that, if there's one thing I'd like to see happening is really seeing how we can work collaboratively in a much more effective way through platforms like the WRG, which have immense potential to showcase effective and innovative solutions and help scale them.
From my point of view, what I'd like to see is, first of all, a successful 2023 water conference in New York, with the involvement of the most stakeholders that we can, because we believe, of course, necessary to reunite the world global leaders of policy making, but it would be quite empty without the participation of the private sector. And I hope there will be very good and fruitful side events where these two worlds can meet and sit down together to make the world more than just words, but actions and real changing.
Thank you. And Ramsey?
Mine is very short, so I'd like to see the UN Treaty for Marine Protection get through and agreed.
Very good. Thank you. And with that, I will hand over to Suraj to give his closing remarks. Thank you. And please thank the panelists. Yeah.
the presenters from Government of India, Uttar Pradesh, and also from South Africa, and these panelists and the moderator. I apologize for not coming on time because I was held up in a meeting with the Government of Australia. And but I had basically 3 points I wanted to make. I think I picked up most of what was discussed. And a lot of this is influenced by having tried to make this happen in many countries where the World Bank is working. In Central Asia, and last 5 years I was in the Middle East, out of Lebanon, but covering many countries in the Middle East. First is the politics. We are still talking about pilots, a project here, a project there, few 100,000 people here, a few thousand people there. It's not going to solve the problem. If you heard me speak in the opening plenary today, the scale of the problem is huge. Our analysis, ADB analysis, the high-level policy panel 2021, we are looking at billions of dollars to be invested in water and sanitation if you want to meet the targets. That number is going up. And I said our motivation for being here, part of this event, is that 3.6 billion people do not have access to safe sanitation. There are many girls today in 21st century who do not go to school because there's no safe toilet in the school. This is the reality today. So I think we got to be very serious about it. And I think this issue of not being on the political leadership's agenda is a huge problem. Many countries I have seen, water is the least funded sector in the budget. Most underfunded, most underinvested, and least priority given by most governments. So it is not on the radar screen. You can have conferences, but the reality today is that if in the water conference you get the ministers of water, they will always say, yeah, water is the most important thing. The Minister of Finance will tell you, I have $100. If I have to give you more, I have to take it from somewhere else. The reality in today's world is essentially that the economies are not growing, the debt is increasing, the debt servicing, the cost of debt service is increasing. So you have a very difficult problem to deal with. But I think it's very important to make the case for this to be on the political agenda. The second is the approach to bringing public, private, and I would say public by large, the people by large, the civil society organizations and the local institutions as part of the discussion. I think 2030 is a great model in terms of how we can do it, but we really want the governments to take full ownership of this multi-stakeholder platform. This has to be the way of doing business. It is very important that there is a very clear set of reform program. What will it take for Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Credit Suisse to do more work in their countries, to invest more capital, to invest in more projects? The reality today is that if you see the global trend, the total investments in country, total FDI in countries declining. It's not going up. So which means something we are doing is actually not working, all that we put together. So essentially the governments which have a responsibility to provide safe sanitation and safe drinking water to the people have to prioritize reforms agenda. The need for much more focus on creating enabling environment for domestic private sector and the foreign direct investments to come in the country. And of course, there's a whole ecosystem in terms of reforms, access to finance, the need for bankable projects to be prepared, and the role of the other organizations to help. And all this can put in place if there's a very strong political leadership to make this happen. My experience, the governments are still finding it very difficult to work on reforms. A lot of this is to do with the political economy of reforms, vested interests, corruption, lack of competition, very monopolistic practices in countries. All this got to change. The last thing I wanted to mention is how is the World Bank going to look at it going forward? The one initial idea we have is, first of all, is that we want to make a much more stronger economic case for governments to look at water as a source of growth, water as a source of creating jobs. Because the political leadership globally in our countries is more focused on creating jobs for those young people. If they do not get jobs, They come on the street, they start protesting. This is the biggest, the only threat that the political leaders have. They're very scared of that scenario. So we got to be able to link water with the jobs agenda. And that will take a lot of rigorous analysis, data, evidence, experiences to be able to make that case. So I think we're going to focus a lot more on the economics of water. The second is to work with the governments on a very clear theory of change as to how can private sector be part of the theory of change to bring the reforms, to create jobs in the country, to bring more investments. And different terms are used for it, what we call maximizing finance for development. I think that was the theme of this session today, isn't it? Billions to trillions. What we call in our terminology, maximizing finance for development. And we would like to embark on that kind of a process for countries where we think we got to act fast, particularly water-stressed countries. And you put the whole ecosystem of reforms, building a pipeline of bankable projects, work with investors, work with private sector, work with the users of water sector, industries dependent on water, bring all of them together to the multi-stakeholder platform that has been established in many countries. So that is the kind of vision we have. You have our commitment to work with you on this. And I think it was a great discussion that you had today. We would like to build on this and I think organize more such conversation at the country level with the governments in the lead and we joining that process and bringing all the other stakeholders together to take this discussion forward. So thank you very much. I guess we have a welcome drink reception being organized by CV, I guess. So thank you very much for all of you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to your announcements.
Thank you.